but we can start with just like, who are you? Right? We're going to ease into it. So I'll do a little intro of who I think you are. In terms of like your role and just how you came into the space. But then you can give a little background on who you are at Room to Breathe, what you care about, and then what maybe a lot of people don't know. I mean, there's like this weird, what's the word I want? I was thinking like ambiguity, but there's like always mysteries to therapists if you're not their client. But there's also mysteries if you are their client, right? Because you're like, how they work with other clients, right? Or like, who was the client they saw before me? Like all of those things. I could come up with so many different on that. So anyway, I will start. Obviously, you're Samantha Allweiss, LCSW. You came into Room to Breathe through our teacher training, 2018.
I think 2019, because it got into 2020.
You were our first scholarship. You were at Refugee One. Which I always think I know a lot about, but I don't know enough about, probably, in terms of your role there, because I know you had a lot of hats. But you are a heart-centered, genuine, compassionate human that cares a lot about how people feel in their environment. And I think you've played a huge role here, obviously have taken on the role of director of social inclusion and responsibility. I always mess that title up. But you advocate for our therapists and our yogis, and make sure we are developing the right policies and procedures that are taking care of folks outside of just getting their job done. And yeah, you're a therapist and you're trauma informed and you see folks, I think, of all walks of life. But I know you are very skilled in treating folks with chronic pain, and bringing in that somatic background with things. You have been a really nice bridge between our yoga studio and our therapy practice. And I think you're a really important voice in our community. So
thank you.
Yeah. Did I hit all the things that you feel, or?
Yeah, we're good to go, right?
So yeah, why don't you share? I think it would be fun to hear about your journey, like your perspective of your journey since 2019. And doing the teacher training with Serena and being in person, which is not a common thing these days, especially with our teacher trainee cohorts. So yeah,
I think I almost want to start backing up with how I found the teacher training. I became really interested in non-Western, non-centric forms of healing. And especially when I was working at Refugee One and working with people that were non-native English speaking, it felt like I was doing a lot of the top-down processing work, right? Like the thinking to feeling instead of the feeling and body-based work. And I was just missing something in my clinical work. And so then I became really passionate about finding a way to do that. And I will never forget, someone posted on our University of Chicago alumni page, and it was for the teacher training and for a potential scholarship, because I was like, know something, I talk about this in part with my clients in specific ways, but I don't love public speaking. So I was like, I don't know if I can see myself teaching. I think I literally initially said, heck no. But I really want to integrate this into my work, but it's not going to be a revenue generator for me. And I was also working in nonprofit work. And so, the financial piece comes to mind. And so I remember that. And also I was finding a lot of very fitness focused yoga trainings.
Right.
And I was like, that's not it. And I remember it saying psychologically informed. And I was like, what the heck? This exists? Are you kidding me? It was almost just like, this is exactly, and I'd been looking for months. I'd been trying to find spaces and then trying to find something that was cost affordable. And I couldn't find anything. And then it was just like, this happened. And it was like one of those, I remember calling a friend and being like, oh my gosh, it has happened and it's too good to be true. Like there's no way it's going to matter. Like, it's not going to happen.
It was our first offering, which maybe you didn't know at the time.
I had no idea. Yeah. And I've gotten really lucky in my life in these ways of like the very first year that I was at University of Chicago for social work was the very first year they offered an international social work program, which then led me to Refugee One. Was the very first year they partnered with University of Chicago and taking students.
Oh, wow.
And then this was like the first year you all offered the scholarship. And so these
like manifest
things, you fall into place in this really powerful way. So all that to say, then when I started the teacher training, I still had a lot of these like Western centric notions of what it would be. And I remember the very first day being like, hi, my name is Sam. I'm not flexible. And Serena was like, okay, that's not. I was like, I'm going to be really bad at yoga. I'm not flexible. I just want to let everyone know. And of course, Serena was like, I don't care. And I also remember, being in space with people and learning and growing in a way that really helped sustain me for as long as it did in the community mental health space, because I was learning and growing in a way that I really hadn't had an opportunity to do in a while.
That's cool.
Because it's constantly, you're up against limited resources and more work than folks will ever fund. And and kind of combating the burnout and finding so much healing in taking teacher training. And so much personal growth.
Small feat. I mean, you were taking the train to downtown, at least 3 times a week?
Yeah.
If not more. Some weeks when it was the Monday through Friday, like 5 to 9ers.
Yeah. And I got really lucky and like my work was right off the red line and you all are right off the red line. So I just got to go like straight down most days. And so that just like luck.
Totally.
But and so and I just remember like all of the pieces falling into place of like, oh, this is exactly what I had been looking for in the piece of my clinical practice that had been missing. And I was also going through my own health journey, had like surgery and came in that day and really was struggling with, I think, coming to terms with my own physical limitations as a result of it. And so I also think found a lot of healing in the way you all address.
You can say we now.
We. Yes. You all at that time. And now we, thank you. The way we address and kind of speak openly about the way yoga has been culturally appropriated and the way it is actually meant to be. And the unity that has to come of the mind and body. And it's not getting your body into a pretzel or what you can make your body physically do, but how to become more aware of your body.
Totally.
So I might have gotten off track in my response.
We're still there. We're still at the Room to Breathe entry for you. But I think also speaking a little to your personal journey of your health, I think that like two things, right? You were at Refugee One experiencing burnout, going through our teacher training, also dealing with your own personal health stuff. And then part of me wants to speak to our mental health training in the training that you gave me hard, but really good feedback. And you now are responsible for helping us evolve our programming, and bridging those gaps and kind of seeing those gaps of how we are delivering trainings to non-therapists and making sure that it is appropriate and also comprehensive for somebody who's not in the mental health field. And for some reason, I just kind of want to go on that topic because I feel like it's a good thing to chat about. Of back in the first offering of our teacher training, it was like, well, Sara, you should just do this mental health first aid module of the teacher training, which is intentionally for yoga instructors to feel supported in all the psychology that walks into the space, right? And all the psychological support potential that can be placed on the yoga instructor. And my weakness is developing programming, which you've probably learned, and why you and Erica are such a big part of our leadership now. But something that happened in there was you were able to sit with my delivery of like definitions and my fear of going into scenarios because I didn't know what was too much and what was, trauma evoking, if you will, for folks. And since 2019, you've really helped evolve that. You've brought Kath into it and they've helped bring in their expertise on that. And yeah, I think that is also part of just your role here, like that it started back when you were a trainee.
Sure.
And I think in hindsight, I can see that of like, oh, damn, like Samantha was already getting feedback where feedback needed to be given and helping us develop programming when she wasn't even working here yet.
Well, I think I also had like in my work before, our mental health program was embedded in the resettlement agency. And so what was unique about that is we had such a multidisciplinary team. And so I also think that's what was really helpful for me in thinking about, okay, how can we have conversations with non-mental health professionals about mental health? And, this might be calling out things that I think it's okay to call out. A lot of mental health first aid trainings are very much focused on diagnoses.
Yes.
And like all of the ones that I've taken in the past. And so I had started in my own work and with agencies who were supporting refugee and new immigrant, and mental health was coming into play, even if they weren't clinicians.
Totally.
That became something I was really passionate about, of like, how do we actually have these conversations in ways that is approachable for non-mental health professionals? So I got lucky in some ways of like, that was a perspective that I already had because mistakes had been made and
Sure.
in the past of like, oh, I'm taking for granted what I think folks know, and recognizing, no, like this is because I've had access to this as a clinician, and just how stigmatizing mental health can be. I think to your point, it makes sense that you had those questions, because I think there can be a lot of fear evoked when we talk about mental health. It seems like it's happening more frequently, but there's a lot of challenges in terms of how do we have these conversations and get really honest that, yeah, this could show up in your space, because we are calling in folks and we are recognizing we are psychologically informed in our yoga, and that might shift the population that's interested in participating in our community.
Right.
And that can lead to sometimes challenging situations and scenarios, though I think it can happen absolutely anywhere, without there being so much fear for a new teacher trainee that then they shut down around.
Right. And if you bring up diagnoses, it just brings in more fear instead of the normal human experience of, you can hold space for this. And here's the boundary between what you can hold space for versus what you don't need to do,
Yes.
control, or fix, and where we can come in for support. And I think you've done a wonderful job at moving the mental health first aid and just the, how we define psychologically sensitive yoga in our community, and continue to check in on each other on how we are embodying that in both our teaching and showing up in the therapy space.
Yeah. I appreciate you bring that in, because I think what the anxiety that shows up for a lot of people is they're taking too much responsibility, and they're thinking that they have to hold things that's not within their realm or area of expertise and not theirs to hold.
Right.
And I think it's hard conversations. I mean, we've had this a lot, right? That there are gaps in the system. There are things that still are just not working, right? I think we're moving in the direction away from policing mental health crises, but
Sure.
that's historically been what's happened and continues to happen. And so like sitting in the hard conversations, I think is important, but also recognizing this is not all your responsibility and you can't fix this system in one interaction. And so here's grounded things that you can do to respond in a way that is most compassionate and loving and human, because that's what someone in crisis is at the end of the day, just another human experiencing a really hard thing. That if we can just bring it back to the humanity of it, I think it helps alleviate a lot of the anxiety.
Right.
That
and we
folks
take
feel.
away like the terms and the professionalism of it.
Right.
And more of just like, this is a situation that feels really big in a really small, like when we're talking about yoga instructors in a yoga class, right? This is like an hour of the day, and that human that's dealing with something that you can hold space for is just a small blimp of time.
Mm-hmm.
And you have the skills to hold that space, and you also have a support of a community behind you.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I think, the idea of here are the resources that you can turn to, because you are not responsible for addressing someone's mental health concerns. Like that is not what a yoga instructor is there to do. Yoga can have benefits to someone's mental health, but it's not a mental health service in its singular design. And so I think that piece is really important too, of like, let's make sure people understand what resources they can share with people, they can turn to if someone's in crisis. So that you don't have to figure it out. And then the thing that I love that we do is in the scenarios, having people practice the language. How do you offer compassion to someone? What does that sound like coming from your voice? So that we're not asking someone to call upon these things that maybe don't yet feel authentic or natural to them. So continue to
especially when
practice.
they're in their own crisis, when they're dealing with a crisis.
Yes. Yeah. Right. And, we're humans too. Our own trauma can show up and all of those things. And so the more grounded people are in what is it that I can do, what can I not do, it also helps us stay regulated. What is it that I want to say? How do I want to approach this and practice that? Then it just makes it that much less scary. Right.
Yeah.
So.
Well, not to like totally change the subject, but I want to talk about your other roles here. And maybe just you as a therapist, because one of my intentions of coffee chats is to get like tastes of folks. And I think the hardest taste to get is of a therapist when you don't actually work with them yet. And so, yeah, I don't know what my direct question for you would be, because part of me also feels you play a huge role in guiding therapists and kind of speaking to what you were just saying, right? Like, you have a really compassionate approach to folks, and you're really specific and clear on making sure therapists are taking care of themselves and regulated and knowing how to regulate. So yeah, I don't really have a direct question, but more so just let's speak to your evolution as a therapist and a supervisor at Room to Breathe, because you've been here since 2020, which is wild. To me, I mean, I think we can all say that 2020 to 2023 feels like the longest and shortest lapse of time that has ever happened.
Even is time? Yeah.
But yeah, like, because you came from literally Serena telling me that you were thinking of leaving Refugee One, and I was like, let's pass. So you've since built a full caseload, and you have 3 supervisees in a group.
Yeah. As you in a group.
Oh no. Am I frozen or are you frozen?
I think you froze for a second. Okay, there we go.
Oh, there you go. But you're also like my go-to person for like how to write out language for things and make sure you do a lot of the onboarding. And that has happened in the last 1.5 years. So yeah, what would you say is like the biggest thing you've gained or learned since joining in 2020?
Ooh, that's a really good question.
Because you've grown a lot. So maybe, I mean, you're the person who shared growth edges with me, and that's like one of my favorite terms and things to even like reflect on. So yeah, maybe you can even name some of your growth edges that you've grown through here.
Sure. Yeah. I definitely, I remember hearing shortly after I came on, I was listening to a training, and it was about self-care. And one of the things that the trainer said was, we need to start thinking about self-care as community care. And that if we can keep ourselves well, I mean, a great example is in the pandemic, we are caring for the whole community. I think I had a really hard time practicing self-care initially. A lot of my self-care, what I thought of self-care, it just had to be productive. So I think I've grown personally. And actually, when we did the exercise from Kelly's training this past week, and the values training, and then I realized that one of my primary values now is inner peace. And I said to my group, there is no way that's what it would have been before, because I was so externally focused and so focused on caring. And I think trying to hold way too much for other people that was not mine to hold. So in part, when I talk about the mental health first aid training, it's been lessons learned of ways that I've showed up to crises that really extended beyond what was my responsibility when I was an intern. And so I think that piece has really informed how I am as a supervisor, and also just understanding that burnout is not just a fault of an individual, that it's a fault of systems, larger systems, and then also needs to be thought of as what is it that the organization, the practice, what is it that where is that failure happening, and then how to shore that up. And so I think I also am very cognizant about where are my, my supervisees at personally, how are they doing as a human? Because that doesn't leave the therapy room.
Yeah.
And is that being attended to? And it came really from my own evolution of understanding how important that is. And that when I didn't, it really did have an impact on my overall physical health and mental health too. But that was the wake-up call that I was having. One of the hardest things I've ever done in my life was transitioning out of community mental health. I always said I would never do it, that I would go to my grave doing it. And then just recognizing that it, unfortunately, it's not an indictment of any particular organization.
Right.
In a lot of ways, it's not a sustainable model. And so like having to transition and then having time, being like, what do I do with my time? And then kind of finding the things that really bring me joy and seeing how much that actually helps me grow as a clinician, that it's not just taking so many CEUs or going to this training or learning this theoretical model. It's like, who am I as a person? And my reflective supervisor really helped transform it for me, because I am not personally very religious, but she said to me, "You're spiritual." And that was huge for me, because a lot of our conversations in my reflective supervision is, how are you cultivating that spiritual connection? And I think about it as connection to the larger world around me and nature, and being a good steward of the world and caretaker of the world. And so I think that piece then also informs the way I approach my supervision. And then thinking about the practice as a whole, and what is it really to be in community with each other, and how are we the best community members to each other possible? And that is the framework through which the policies became really important to me, or like the reason why. And just seeing how that is what helps combat burnout and creates really excited, healthy, engaged therapists that then can care for the folks that they can care for in a sustainable way.
Right.
So I'm not sure I answered all of your questions. So
no, you did, because I think you also approach therapy in that same worldview, if you will, with that same worldview. And I think speaking to maybe how are you bringing yoga into it? Because when you say spirituality, I also think of your own practice of yoga, and like inner peace as a value usually means you have some form of spirituality and some form of like a system of hope, if you will, is sometimes how I refer to spirituality. Like you have a compass that is both within you and outside of you, and you have a place, you have a personal resource. And I think you spoke a lot to your growth of how you have navigated not away from your work at Refugee One, but you've navigated from a space of servitude that wasn't working for you, and more into a space of like passion and abundance with the work that you want to do, and recognizing that accessibility is a really complicated and complex term when we're talking about mental health. And I think that's a huge thing that keeps mental health workers in the cycle of burnout. That place of like, well, I'm not helping somebody if I'm not also sacrificing a huge part of me. And I think that's been that's kind of what you're speaking to, that huge growth part. But I am also kind of shifting us into like how you have continued this conversation of accessibility. Because you just went from being super accessible to a specific population of refugees to also still being accessible, but there being limits, and you being a very important piece of being taken care of in that space, and continuing to figure out like what pieces of our system hold us less accessible than an agency, if you will, but also there are agencies that are super inaccessible when we're talking about mental health care.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think to like round out our conversation, maybe just speaking to some of the conversations that you and I have had about like, how do we continue to evolve as a private practice that's integrated with therapy and yoga, that's in a really different space when it comes to like, we have our yoga side and we're navigating being a yoga studio in this period of time, which is hard. And we also have this private practice space where you're helping us build this community of therapists and have that conversation of building the bridge between yoga and therapist, while also working up against like yoga costs money to keep the business alive, therapy costs money to keep a business alive, and we can still be accessible. But we've had to ask a lot of questions about that.
Yeah. And I mean, I appreciate you bringing this in because, you know, to the point we talked about earlier in terms of mental health first aid, we can simultaneously acknowledge the issues with the system, while also recognize we are not fixing it overnight. And so there are these limitations, these systems that we're operating in, but we don't have to get complacent in that. You know, I think there's the advocacy piece that I see as so much of a part of my personal life and the way I orient myself, and also it shows up in the therapy space with clients. And it's also talking about, okay, what within the system, what are ways that we can increase accessibility, right? I think one of our biggest pushes right now, and I'm sure Hannah will speak to it even more, is the groups piece. And when we think about accessibility, one thing that I loved in the training and was my capstone was chair yoga, because it's also thinking about, if people have chronic pain, chronic health issues, how can we actually ensure that they can still participate in a way that helps them feel safer and not less safe in their body, right? And having conversations about how do we increase access through insurance, through taking as many insurances as possible in a way that's actually sustainable. Because you could do the Firefly model, and I see this.
I don't know if I know that.
Yeah, I talk about it with supervisees. You can be a firefly and you can just shoot up in the air, and you're just gonna burn yourself, I guess, firework model. And you're just gonna burn yourself out really quickly, or you're gonna shine really bright and you're gonna have no juice left.
Right.
Or it's a sustainable model with the continued push and advocacy piece. And talking about, how do we amend our hiring practices so we make sure that we're both having our clinical community reflect the populations that we want to serve? And how are we also ensuring that we are working with folks who are aligned with our mission, and also not just pulling from the same pool? Right. And then having folks that look like us and present like us and have the same histories. It doesn't work for our client population, and it doesn't work to better us as a practice. And so I think all of it is like one in the whole of like, that accessibility piece is also thinking about, how are we increasing access in terms of having diversity in our clinicians, so that when folks come to us, they can see identities of our clinicians, their identity is reflected back in our clinicians. And that's always the dream and goal.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah. You're delightful to talk to. I think we could go on and on, but I feel like this is a good place for us to wrap up. I mean, I want to say, like, you don't have any, like, how do people find you? They find you on our website.
Yeah.
You are looking to figure out how you show up in the yoga space. But we'll save that intro for another day. And I don't think that our room to breathe would be as successful without you. So I hope you know that. I hope more people know your name after this chat with our like 3 YouTube subscribers. We're gonna be big.
We're very happy they're here.
But I'm sure we'll have another chat and it will be maybe more specific to accessibility or just your role in leadership on our team, or maybe even the chronic pain community and showing up in the mental health space. I mean, we could go for days. But yeah, thank you. I'm just gonna press stop record.
Okay.